welcome back to Spiritual Wake Up Call. I'm your host, Marilyn Tennant. In this episode, we're going to be getting into regenerative farming and soil health with Justin Taylor. He is a soil specialist who has traveled around the nation informing other farmers, small scale farmers, market farmers, organic farmers on how to rebuild their soil, which is so imperative to today's world because soil actually has the key to not only providing super nutritious food that will nourish your body, nourish your soul, but also has the potential to stop climate crisis. And so we're going to get into that. We're going to get into why that is and give you even some tips and tricks as to how to start your own garden, how to start your own compost, how to be an active member in society and voting for what you want to see with your dollar and making good choices as a good steward of the earth. So be prepared to open your hearts, open your minds, and see what's inside. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Spiritual Wake Up Call. I have a very special guest here tonight. I got Justin Taylor. He is formerly known as Farmer Cheesy, and he is a soil specialist that's going to be teaching us about soil advocacy and how soil can really help the future, play a big part in the climate change that's going on right now, and a little bit about regenerative farming, which is so important. I'm just so honored to have you, Justin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Marilyn. I'm really happy to be here, really excited to be on your podcast and talking about soil and how it can change the world. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so why don't you go in a little bit on your history of how you got into soil education, soil advocacy, and regenerative farming?
Yeah, so that goes back quite a ways. I think I started gardening about 8 years ago, and I started to kind of fall in love with making compost. And my partner at the time was going to OSU in Oregon, and we were living in Corvallis. And she had this soil science teacher that was just like, he was an ex-rock star, and he was just so like revved up about soil. And I remember her coming to me and saying like, I got this email from my soil science teacher and it says like, hey baby, like come to the soil science class and blah blah blah, whatever, like come volunteer on the farm. I'm like, well, who is this guy? And come to find out, like this guy just like really put on a show at her school. And naturally, I'm a really kind of eccentric person, and I got super pumped about that, because I was making compost and I'd been wanting to learn more about soil microbiology. So I started sneaking into her soil science classes at OSU, and he was actually really cool about it, because I would come and volunteer at the student farm as well, and was just trying to get as much information from this guy as I could. I mean, he was a real rock star when it came to being on stage and teaching about soil science and all the bugs in soil, and just really got me super pumped up about it. And I think that that's really where that passion cultivated. And I started using the things that I learned in my own garden. I started making compost and compost teas. I got worms and started making vermicompost, and figuring out how to eliminate my food waste and turn it into something that was usable by the plants in my garden. So that's where it really kind of first cultivated. And then I got my first apprenticeship on a farm, decided I wanted to go the farming route. And from there, it just kept on excelling. I got more and more interested in it, just wanted to learn as much as I could about soil microbiology. And then I remember listening, when I was working in Washington, I was working on a horse draft powered farm there, and I was listening to the No Till Growers podcast that just come out. And that's when I first heard Dr. Elaine Ingham talk about soil and soil microbiology and the soil food web. And I just became obsessed with it. It's all I could talk about. And so whenever I was working on a lot of these farms, I was trying to put all that I was learning into practice, and I was very adamant in managing all the compost systems on these different farms and trying to improve their soil. So that's kind of the background of my obsession with soil microbiology, like specifically. Um, but yeah, I don't know if you wanted me to talk about building the bus and traveling farm to farm.
Yeah, that's right. So you and your partner at the time were traveling all over the country, and you would help advocate for soil and regenerative farming, and also help people that were willing to go into this niche of farming. So if you want to go ahead and tell us about that and what your mission would be, as far as like helping farmers, and what was the difference between what you guys would do and like large scale farming.
Yeah, so my partner at the time and we converted a short school bus into a tiny house and decided to hit the road working on different farms. We wanted to work in different systems and kind of see how they were working with the landscape and using those ecological techniques of farming that really kind of embraces, it's not just about soil life, but it's also about all of the other life that's involved in the ecology of a farm system or any natural system, right? So this is kind of like the basis of ecological farming is just mimicking Mother Nature and the systems that she's already have been really successful at, for billions of years that she's been around. It's not till humans came around that we started to see a decline in diversity and started to really see, the atmosphere change for the worse and kind of see this like six extinction start to happen with all of these large animals across the world. So we started studying ecology and ecological farming and set out in our bus to really learn as much as we could from all these different farms. I like to say, there's as many ways to farm as there are farmers. So with that, as we traveled, we worked on, I think, over 15 or 20 different small farms. We got a real breadth of experience there and really got to see how all these different climatic conditions in these different areas of the country and how, the ecology was affected by the way they were farming. So, it's a lot different than you see on large scale farms. Large scale farms are typically using really large equipment, and typically it's a monoculture. So they're growing one single crop year after year after year. And they're using a lot of heavy tillage and soil disturbance. And this is the basis of regenerative farming is building soil. And so the problem with tillage and all of this heavy soil disturbance is that it's destroying the soil. It's creating compaction layers in the soil so that plant roots cannot get as deep as they need to go to reach that water and the nutrients that are deep down in the soil. And eventually, you have a surface compaction in which you can barely even plant a seed in there. So it's very different, and it's a totally different mindset of farming too. I think that a lot of those farmers, they really don't want to be spraying herbicides and pesticides. They know and they understand the effects of it, but they've been taught that that's the only way to do it, And so now we just have to kind of like relearn and reteach ourselves that actually this is harming the environment. This is all the chemicals that we're putting on these plants, and in addition with the tillage is creating all this runoff and causing these crazy algal blooms in the Gulf of Mexico, in which nothing can grow. So as you can tell, it's this large scale farming has had a great impact on our environment, a great impact on soil. we lose, I think it's like 2 footballs of soil. They say like every 8 minutes or something like that, something crazy, due to these heavy machinery, this heavy tillage, this heavy chemical use. And so we knew that, and we kind of we had been learning a lot about our food system. I think veganism kind of took us down that road a little bit. We were vegans for a while, and that kind of just took us deep down into agriculture and where our food was coming from. And I'm not a vegan anymore, but and I think that that's because I understand now how animals can have a great impact on actually rebuilding soil whenever they are grazed properly. But so that's kind of like what we did. We were just traveling around farm to farm, learning, what they were doing and how the things that they were doing to improve their soil, or not. We've definitely been on some farms too that weren't actively doing the things to improve their soil health. And that's not to say that's a subject, right? Because farming is hard, you know, and this is a big part of it that a lot of people don't talk about. That you know, of course, soil health is really important, but the health of the farmer is also super important. So that back-breaking labor that they're doing, it's like, how can we reduce, the stress on our minds and on our bodies? And it's kind of this weird paradigm. It's like, tilling is this easy thing that you can do across the bed and you have a fresh seed bed, right? It's a lot harder to go and broad fork of every single bed and then to lay, a thick layer of compost on to get that fine seed bed. So there's a lot to be said there. There's a lot to learn, and just trying to learn how to incorporate all of these things, and also improve the soil health is not the easiest thing to figure out, but that's what we set out to do.
That's right. It's not easy, but I have some just very sobering statistics speaking on just how important this topic of discussion of soil health is to the environment, to climate change, and hence the world. So at this point, when we are making this video, 50% of America's topsoil is gone. That's half of the topsoil that we originated with before we moved in and colonized this land. And it's actually projected that we only have 60 more years of agricultural harvest. Sometimes those statistics are hard to, believe, but I'm going to make sure to post all of the sources that I have here. So that's from Scientific America, but there is an argument where, and you went on into veganism, which I just recently had started becoming a vegan because of this importance with agriculture in my life, and wanting to know where my food came from and dabbling into that more led me down that path. But also, like you said, it's not necessarily the animals that are harming the environment and the soil. It's how they are being raised, and like there's grass-fed cattle versus lot-fed cattle, which makes a big difference. But something that really was interesting to me is a bacteria that was found more readily in the soil before we colonized and did large-scale farming across the land. When the bison roamed free, there was the methane tropic bacteria that was from, all the grassland. There was this bacteria that would help and would actually neutralize the soil. So this is from soilsolution.org, that there was a bacteria in the land, even though there was like a lot more bison than there are cattle here, that at the time there wouldn't be nearly as much methane, and they believed it was because of this bacteria. So that goes back to the microbiome of the soil. And I just wondered if you could please speak more on microbiome a little bit, and how soil rejuvenation can help, and what do you have to say about large scale farming? How do you see like us turning this trajectory that we're on into something so sobering, something so scary, into a promise, more of a hopeful future where we actually get food because most of our food is from agriculture. Um, do you have anything at all to share on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, really, so it all starts with the soil food web, right? Which is what I have studied pretty extensively under Dr. Elaine Ingham. The soil food web is comprised of four main organism groups. So you have bacteria, you have fungi, you have protozoa, and then you have nematodes. When it comes to our climate, the whole food web is very important, but it's really the fungi that's holding that carbon within the cells of its body. Um, the carbon to nitrogen ratio of fungi can be greater than 1,000 to 1 in a strand. So the problem with the large scale agriculture is mostly the disturbance from chemicals and from tillage. When when uh, when you're on a large scale farm and it's tilling, basically what's happening is the tines of that, 200 horsepower, whatever horsepower that tractor is, 80 horsepower, they're just grinding all that soil structure and just grinding it and creating a compaction layer, which creates anaerobic conditions. And anaerobic basically just means without oxygen. And so whenever you don't have that oxygen in the soil, these aerobic organisms cannot thrive. And those are the good guys. The aerobic organisms are what do all of the nutrient cycling without the synthetic fertilizers. And so basically there's a symbiosis with that and the plants. So the plants, everybody knows pretty much what photosynthesis is, right? Like we're taking energy from the sun, we're taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and oxygen, and then it's basically creating food for the plant. Well, the plant is taking 40% of that energy or more and sending it out through its roots. And so, in the last 40 years, we've discovered that these microbes, the fungi, the nematodes, the bacteria, the protozoa, they are eating up this energy that the plants are giving to them. So they have a symbiotic relationship in which the fungi then will completely cover the plant's roots, cover the whole top side of the plant as well, and protect it from disease. So really the big problem here is the disturbance, the chemical disturbance, which is actually, mostly salt-based fertilizers and pesticides, which just get washed away when it rains. Those salts bind with the water, and then we have runoff, and it goes into the rivers, it goes, deep into the soil, into our drinking water. Well, it actually doesn't go deep in the soil because it's just running off of the soil and it's taking the soil with it. And that's how we're
Right.
losing our soil. So it's that soil structure that we're losing, which allows water to infiltrate into the soil rather than just completely run off. So did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it definitely does. I am interested in knowing what you think is the antithesis to this degradation of soil, from whether it be the basic consumer voting with their dollars, lifestyle choices like veganism. It doesn't have to be that. Like, what if somebody really cannot live without meat? What would be a healthier option economically and for the environment? And for people at home that want to like start a garden, or maybe even go into small scale farming, what would be, how would you point them in? What direction would you point them in?
Absolutely. So yeah, to affect change as a consumer, that's going to start with, yeah, voting with your dollar. Where are you buying your food from? Is it conventional? Is it organic? And the best advice I can give to people, there's been a lot of people kind of shaming the organic label, But at the end of the day, really, it's the best label that we have that is highly regulated. As a farmer of 6 years, I've dealt with organic certification. I've had certifiers come out to my land and track my plants and make sure that I'm keeping books on everything. It's pretty intense. So I really think for consumers, the best thing you could do, if you have to buy your food from a grocery store, buy organic. That's the best thing you can do. And if you want to buy meat, you want to buy regenerative meat. And the best label that I know for regenerative meat is the Savory Institute's label, which is land to market. So if you can see a land to market label on, the meat in the grocery store, that means that you're buying uh, meat that was grazed in a very, very good manner that mimics the way that bison and buffalo once grazed the land years ago, thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago. So that's the best, as a consumer, the best thing I think you can do. And really the best thing is to know your farmer, right? So go to farmers markets and talk to your farmers, ask about their growing practices. Do they till? How are they grazing their animals? Are they grazing their animals? What are they feeding their animals? I mean, even grass-fed animals oftentimes are still fed grain. So is that grain organic or is it conventional? Because then if it's conventional, you're still buying from those really big, large farms that are creating all that soil destruction. So these are really important questions that you should take to the farmers market with you whenever you're learning about your farmers, and those are the best labels that I can think of. So, and as for having your garden, if you wanted to grow regeneratively in your garden or to start a little market garden or something like that, compost is really the best way to facilitate nutrient cycling and to get those microbes working for you in your soil. I would say avoid tillage, at all costs. There's really no need to till. There's plenty of really great garden tools out there that can work that soil up for you. And then, if you need a fine seed bed, you can just cover it with some compost, and you can plant directly into that compost. So, gardening, it's not as much of an issue when it comes to gardeners. I think that most gardeners are already, doing a lot of the right things, but, just avoid those chemical fertilizers, those synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, because the truth of the matter is when you have that soil food web in place and you are fostering the conditions for it to thrive, your plants are going to be totally healthy, because that's all they need. They did a study, I think it was back in 2003, in which they took 3 million soil samples from all over the world, and they discovered that not a single sample was lacking the nutrients that a plant needs to thrive, right? So I believe it's 28 nutrients that plants need to thrive. Not a single sample would lack that for the next, for plants to grow for the next 1,000+ years. So this is telling us something, right? It's not that the soil is missing nutrients. What it's missing is the life in the soil to transform those nutrients into plant available form. And that's the whole point of the soil food web. I mean, when you go to the redwood forest, right, it's like nobody dumped a bunch of synthetic nitrogen to grow those large trees, right? They're so big, and nobody threw down synthetic nitrogen to grow that. It's already there, and they've taken samples of soil in this forest and found that the nitrogen levels are less than 1 part per million. So that's not what it's about. It's about organic matter. It's about reducing disturbance. Getting that structure in by getting that microbiology in there, keeping your soil covered and fostering those really good aerobic conditions. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. So like what I hear you saying is that plant life, even grass, is good for the soil because it's a symbiotic relationship where they feed off of one another with the thousands of microbiome, the living things between the fungi and the bacteria that is enriching it. Even the earthworms, are really, really great. And when you use a mechanical tillage, it's just like chopping all of those up to 1,000 pieces and killing all, not only the earthworms, but all of the bacteria, that's the good bacteria. And so if you wanted to just start a garden, I think compost is so important because can you get into like a little bit more about compost and how that enriches with just the decomposition and how somebody can do a compost, because there's a lot of misunderstanding I'm finding, like when I hear about how people do it, like they don't just throw their junk in a hole in the ground and like leave it there, right? It kind of
Yeah,
has to
right.
have a little bit more
Right.
tending too. So can you go in briefly and just like layman terms for people that might want to start a compost and how to do that?
Yeah, totally. So definitely like, it takes a little bit more work than just kind of throwing everything together into a pile. I have seen compost systems like that, and trust me, I've done a lot of fixing of those compost systems on some bigger farms. Um, for a home compost system, the best way I can tell you to do it would be to get some sort of like thin wired fencing, so that and you can cut that so that it's about 3 feet tall and then about 3 feet in diameter. And you can go bigger than that if you have enough um, things to fill it with. But it needs to be at least that big so that you can have that enough biomass to create that heat that you need. So get one of those, and then you get some bungee cords to close it together, and you have your bungee cords, and then you're going to just start filling that with you're going to need a lot more carbonaceous materials versus like nitrogenous materials. So that means wood chips, leaves, um, hay, straw, and the more diversity that you have in there, the better your compost is going to be. So you really want about like 60% carbonaceous materials, and then you want about 30% green materials. So this is like, grass clippings, vegetable waste, um, you know, uh, things from your garden, if you have like some stalks or some old plant material, plant residue that you need to throw in there. And then you want 10% high nitrogen in that pile. So that would be manure, right? So if you have like some chicken manure or some rabbit manure is awesome. Or just the more diversity you have, the better it's going to be. But that's like kind of the basis, like key ingredients is 60% woody materials, 30% green materials, and then 10% high nitrogenous materials. And then once you've got all of that together, you want to make sure that you have a good moisture content of about 50%. 40 to 50%. And the way you do that is you squeeze that material in your hands after you've wetted it down. And you should only have about 1 to 2 drops come when you're squeezing as hard as you can. And then you want to just keep mixing everything together, right? So you mix everything together, you let it sit. I suggest buying a temperature probe. That's really the only way you're going to know when to properly flip it, because you're going to want to let it sit above like 135 degrees for at least 3 days. And if it starts
No.
to go above 180 degrees, then you need to flip it like kind of right away, because that's a
Right.
sign that it's starting to go anaerobic.
What could happen if it goes too anaerobic? Can it like combust?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you start to
Yeah, you
see
don't want
that
that.
compost pile get above, 180 degrees, it can totally self-combust, and it does happen on large compost facilities if they're not monitoring correctly. Um, because what's happening there is the lack of oxygen is causing anaerobic microbes to reproduce at a very high rate, and they're using up all that oxygen, and they're producing alcoholic compounds that are super toxic to plants. And then not only that, but it's creating greenhouse gases as well. So then your compost pile starts to contribute to climate change, because then you're releasing really toxic methane and nitrous oxide, which are two of the worst greenhouse gases you can have, right? Especially nitrous oxide. So it's really important to keep that pile aerobic and to put oxygen in the pile whenever it's ready and whenever it's needed. So, every few days you want to be out there and you want to flip your pile, right? So you want to take the middle of the pile and you want to, put it at the bottom, and then take the top, put it in the middle, and the bottom, put that on the top. So, you can pull a tarp in front of it and pull the top off, throw it on there, and then pull your middle out, and just kind of, you want to do that at least 2 or 3 times throughout the composting cycle to make sure it's getting enough oxygen. And then, you'll know whenever it's done because it'll cool down and it'll become room temperature. You don't want to use it when it's really hot because that means there's still decomposition happening, and there could be some toxic compounds still left in that pile that haven't been properly composted.
Wow.
So I don't know, that might have been a pretty well-rounded way to make compost. At the end of the day, doing anything is better than doing nothing, right? Like putting that food waste out there and mixing it
Yeah.
together with some leaves and some straw.
Right. Right. That is very helpful. Thank you for breaking that down. But yeah, it's not just, there's a science behind it, and there's attention that's
For
needed
sure.
and being attuned, and that's why I feel like gardening, farming is such a spiritual process, because you put so much you put your heart and soul into it, and you make something that feeds people, that helps them grow. And what more is more spiritual to me than putting something in your body or growing it from scratch? So I just want to thank you so much, Justin, for helping us touch on this subject. I know there's so much more that we can go into. And I was wondering if there's
For sure.
anything else that you wanted to add. I think that's all the questions I have for tonight. If there's any other points that you have, and also if there's any consulting services that you're doing now, or what projects are you getting into, if you want to share where we can find you.
For sure. Yeah. So the spiritual part about it, I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit because that, when I was a farmer, that was something that was really important to me, and getting involved with the soil and nurturing your body and the people around you, nurturing their bodies, you're nurturing the plants and you're nurturing the soil. It's a full loop there that you're completing whenever you grow food. And and I think it's such a beautiful thing to be out there working, and it tells a story, right? It gives your food a story. And when you're eating food that has a story that you're connected with, it's so much more meaningful. You're really kind of tapping into an ancient tradition, right? That's as old as people. And I think that that's one of the issues with the way industrialization has brought our food system to is that we lack that story that really gets us involved with our food and brings people together. I'm the type of person that, like, whenever I go see my friends or family, what I want to do is I just want to cook a really big meal together. I want us to all come together and get some really good food, get some really great ingredients, and cook together. I think that is such a holy thing to me. And I also want to touch on the point too that soil, actually, they've done studies of this, and when you are working with soil and actually touching soil, it
Mm,
releases serotonin and dopamine in your body.
yes.
So it really is actually, changing the chemistry in your brain and making you happy. So I
Mhm.
think there's something to be said about that. And I can only hope that, more people will start to kind of get in touch with their food, get in touch with soil, and get out there more. Go volunteer on a farm. Farms always need some kind of help.
Mhm.
And then you can become a part of that story with your food. So think that's about it. And
Absolutely.
if you wanted to come find me, I'm on Instagram at Cheesy Cowboy now. It's a CHEEZY Cowboy. I've kind of switched up, what I'm doing these days. I'm kind of going more into spirituality, mindset, and habits. So if you want to go there, you can find a lot of information on how to change your mindset and how to live a happy, more fulfilled life. So anyways,
That's what we all want. And I just thank you for bringing your information here, bringing your knowledge, your wisdom to helping us have a more happy and fulfilled life, because I know that our food has such a big part of that, because food is medicine. And the story, like you said, that it tells of where it came from does affect what you're putting in your body and affects our health and happiness ultimately. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem at all. This was fun. Thanks for having me today, Marilyn.
All right. Thank you and have a good night. Until next time. Appreciate it, Justin. And there you have it, Justin Taylor, soil educator, regenerative farmer, active steward of the earth. And I'm going to make sure to link in the description the podcast where he shared how you can revive soil on your land and how it really can be done within a couple years, as opposed hundreds of years, which is what is taught in the conventional. And so that leaves us at the end. I do want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest in this type of content that strives to change the world, provide hope for the future, provide alternatives to the status quo that we see that is harming the earth, harming our bodies, being an active part of that, and seeing the possibilities of how you can make a difference. So make sure to check out the description for that, and I'll see you next time.